Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. In this video, I'm going to be comparing two mastering chains. One is going to be a set of plugins that are fairly expensive. The other is going to be a set of plugins that you can get completely free. And here we're going to be not only examining how I'm choosing to master this record, but also comparing how good can free software get. Can it come close to the paid software? Can it meet the paid software? Can it exceed the software? Well, we're going to find that it's going to be a mix of everything. So I'm mastering an EDM record here, and for all of you hip-hop heads and rock stars, I know EDM is not always our favorite genre, but for the EDM guys, you're welcome. The reason I'm picking EDM is because EDM is a genre that is extremely demanding in the mastering. The typical levels for EDM are in the -7 to -6 LUFS range, sometimes even higher, and so that's going to cause some... any kind of technical stuff that's going to come up is really going to get exposed because we are really pushing the master. If that's not your favorite genre, just enjoy it for the information. All right, let's pop in here. Let's listen to the mix before we have any kind of mastering stuff on there at all. So before we master anything, we have to say, well, what do we want from this master? I think that this mix sounds generally pretty good. It could use a little bit of extra extension in the top, maybe even a fair amount of extra extension in the top. EDM usually wants to be bright, but at the same time, I feel like it could use a little bit of thickness, a little bit of glue. So we're going to be pushing things in that direction, and then we're going to want to get it really, really loud. Now, I am going to put a trim on the back of this when we're doing the comparisons that's going to take the level down by -8.2 dB, so it does not blow your speakers out, but just know that this is going to be an entire 8 dB louder than what you hear in the actual print. So let's start with our mix, and then we're going to go to our costly chain, and then we're going to go to our free chain. All right, let's check it out. Mix. And free. So the first thing I want to say is that whether we're talking about the expensive chain or the free chain, I think that both actually do sound pretty good. Something to be said for being a decent engineer, I suppose. Am I allowed to give myself that credit? I'll say that. Let's compare the paid one to the free one more time. So sorry about this sort of clumsy setup here, but here's the expensive one. Free. Now, overall, I do think that the expensive chain is a little bit better in a number of regards. The first is that just generally it sounds a little bit bigger. It has a impression of greater loudness even at a similar RMS level. Cool. Right off the bat. The second thing is that the top end feels a little bit more open to me. In fact, the entire record feels a little bit more open to me. In the paid chain, it just feels like the articulation on every instrument is a little bit better, particularly the kick, and generally speaking, the distortion is not quite so congested feeling. There's a slightly dense low mid feeling in the free chain. Okay, sure, but, you know, maybe we can change the comparison a little bit just by taking our limiter up a hair. Is that going to make a big difference? You know, even a little tiny bit of difference on level can make a pretty big difference in terms of perception. Let's try that. So here, the level now gives it the impression of the same amount of bigness. I do have to say the kick is absolutely getting pancaked a little bit more, and there is that same bit of low mid congestion as well as kind of third harmonic distortion that is a little bit more prevalent in the free chain. But generally speaking, if, let's say I had never heard the expensive chain, I'm not mad at this. I actually think this is pretty darn good. So now let's dig in a little deeper and explain what I'm doing, why, and comparing the one-to-one plugin choices. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing here is just getting a little bit of tone going. I want to thicken things up, put a little bit of color in here. So the first thing I'm using is the Plugin Alliance SPL Iron. This is a pretty slow compressor, which is good for just kind of gently gluing everything together. It's going to create a general thickening effect, and it's probably going to be the most transparent of everything that we hear. So you hear that upper mid kind of push forward a little bit. You hear a little bit of extra tone and stuff, but overall pretty subtle. Now, the comparison I'm doing here is going to be with D16 Frontier. This is going to be a little bit more aggressive sounding, and actually there's a really cool control input setting that triggers just from the mid, which I think is really, really neat. So here's our before and after on that. So I actually like this a little bit better in this context than the SPL Iron. It's a very subtle thing again, but I think that the tone is a little bit more evenly distributed. And I also like that this control input is allowing me to have this compression react to just the mid signal. It ends up leaving things feeling a little bit wider overall. Generally, I would say these are pretty comparable. Overall, I would say they're just different beasts, but I think that I do slightly prefer the free one here, which I think is kind of cool. I love Plugin Alliance stuff. Hopefully I won't lose any sponsorships because of that, but I gotta be honest with people, so here I am being honest. Okay, so let's stick with SPL Iron for a moment so that we can go into the next piece of our chain, and that is going to be Acoustica Amber. This I'm using for the top-end boost and only for the top-end boost. This is something that I do very frequently. This is probably my favorite top-end EQ, and I'm doing about maybe 6-7 dB of top-end from a pretty high corner. Now that might sound like a lot, but it's a very smooth, transparent sound, so it doesn't feel like a lot. Here's our before and after. Really nice sounding top end. Now, for comparison's sake, over here, I'm going to turn on Frontier again, and I'm going to go to my top-end boost, which I am using the Tokyo Dawn Slick EQ. I love this EQ. It is probably the least comparable of all the plugins. The Amber plugin is an emulation of the Avalon 2055, and I don't believe that there are any free replicas, so I just picked a plugin where I like the top end and I like the sound. So here we are. So here's our before, then after. I think at a similar amount of boost, we notice the EQ a little bit more. I would say this is a more focused and tight sound, whereas the Amber EQ is more of a transparent and kind of like sheeny, glowy sound. Sorry about that glitch. Let me play our two chains back to back. And so it's not really one-to-one. I mean, my output is also not exactly evenly matched here, so it's a little quieter. I would say we probably need about 0.2 or 0.3 dB of gain to really perfectly match it. Yeah, let's do that comparison one more time. So I wouldn't say that in a like out of context, I can't say that one of these two is actually really better than the other. This to me is giving me a much more tight focused sound, the Frontier and Tokyo Dawn's combo, whereas the SPL Iron and Amber is giving me something that's a little bit more smeared and glued in a good way. Yeah, it's kind of hard to say one is inherently better than the other so far. Okay, the next thing on the menu is going to be some clipping. Clipping is a really, really useful technique in terms of getting things louder. Basically, when you use a limiter, what you're doing is reducing dynamic energy. In order to get things louder, you're reducing the loudest peaks and pushing everything up. Clipping, you do not reduce dynamic energy, you convert dynamic energy into harmonic energy. So that energy remains, and you ultimately get something that sounds a little bit louder, but it also comes with the cost of distortion. So a really good clipper is, in fact, very, very useful and very valuable when we're getting into extremely pushed volume levels. So here on the paid one, I'm using the Schwab Digital Gold Clip. I started playing with this about maybe 4 or 5 days ago. I fell in love with it. It's a really, really good clipper. And a good clipper is hard to make. Distortion is probably the trickiest thing to get right in the software realm. So let's do a little before and after here. This is our costly chain, our expensive chain. What I will say here is not only do I feel that this is making it sound louder, but I also think that it's making it sound better. It's putting a tone and texture into everything, but particularly the kick drum, that I actually like. So even if I were sending this to another mastering engineer, I would keep this on because I like the way that it sounds. So my general rule of thumb is anything that's being done for loudness, take that off if you're sending it to a mastering engineer. Anything that's improving the sound, keep that on when you send to a mastering engineer. But anyway, I think that that's pretty darn good. So now the next up is going to be the K-clip. And just to do 6-to-1, I'm going to use my SPL Iron and Amber 4 and go into K-clip. Somebody asked me if I feel that Gold Clip is worth it at the price point when K-clip is so much cheaper. And my response was I had never used it. So this is my first time using K-clip. We're going to see how it sounds. Before. And now we're going to do a direct comparison to K-Clip 0, which is free, to Gold Clip, which is, I think, a couple $100. So here's K-Clip. So, in my opinion, I do think that there is a significant quality difference in terms of Gold Clip versus K-Clip 0. I think that Gold Clip is notably better sounding to me. I would take K-Clip 0 off before sending to a mastering engineer because while I do think it's doing a decent job of getting things louder, I don't think it's necessarily also improving the sound. But I will say this. This is K-Clip 0. It is the free version. So is the more advanced version something that could be customized in a way where I could get something that both sounds better and gets the record louder? I'd say very possibly. Again, I haven't used it, so I can't say for certain, but I do want to point out that this is not an apples-to-apples comparison. This is a free restricted version where I cannot get under the hood to get at all the parameters, whereas the version I have of Gold Clip is the full version. So I do want to point that out. But in general, I do think that there is a specific quality difference here where I do prefer Gold Clip pretty distinctly. Okay. Losing sponsorships left and right here, potentially. That's fine, as long as I can keep it real with you guys. Okay, the very, very last step is going to be the limiter, and this is where I think the biggest difference shows up, actually, in terms of, like, overall quality. I struggled to find a really good limiter that was free. The best one I think that's out there is the L1 limiter from Cornif Audio. There may be other stuff out there. You can certainly let me know in the comments section below if there's a free limiter that you think stacks up to this, but this is probably the best one that I could find, and I compared it here to the FabFilter Pro L2. So let's go through and get our main chain going so we can do a direct comparison, and we'll do FabFilter versus the L1. So here we go. Here's FabFilter. And you can hear that it does pancake a little bit more. I think some of the distortion is coming from this, so I think that's probably the biggest quality gap here. But that said, I do really like Cornif Audio's stuff in general. They have something called the Puff Puff Mix Pass, which kind of works in a similar function to like a gold clip or a K clip, where you're kind of getting a little bit more level through saturation, and I love that. I actually debated whether or not I wanted to use gold clip or if I wanted to use the Puff Puff Mix Pass. I debated whether I wanted to use the Pro L2 versus the Music Hack Master Plan. There was a lot of debating here because there's very subtle differences. But anyway, this is the chain that I ultimately landed on. So one more time, just to wrap this up, let's compare our expensive chain to our free chain and then close out. So here's expensive. Genuinely not bad, not far off, not bad. So the bottom line is, ultimately, if we have decent stuff, whether or not we've paid for it or it's expensive, whatever it is, if we're good at what we're doing, we're going to be able to get at least comparable results. Now, does really, really good gear give us a little bit of an extra edge? Yes. But if you need to be tight on a budget, and you have to be really discerning about what stuff you're going to pay for, I do think that there's a lot of really great options out there. So to recap what we've got on here, we've got D16, which Frontier is free. Fantastic company. I love the stuff they make. Tokyo Dawn, another company where they have a lot of free stuff and it's all really, really good. K-Clip 0, genuinely pretty good, not bad at all. And then Cornif Audio, the L1 limiter. Cornif Audio, I think of all of the things Cornif makes, this is probably the one, if I'm being very honest, the one that's least impressive to me. All the rest of their stuff, which you do have to pay for, is really quite good. And then lastly, a trim plugin. Trim plugin is free in every DAW, so you don't have to worry about that one. All right, cool. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. And lastly, you know what we say. Actually, you know what? Let me plug my site here because I have a teaching site. It's called WeissAdvice.com, and when you become a member, you get to attend in-person live, well, not in person, but live webinars where you get to see these decisions being made in real time. It's where I teach you how to do stuff. I gotta say, and I mean, yes, I'm a little bit biased, but I do want to put this in the plug here. Now that we're seeing the expensive stuff versus the free stuff and how close it can get, I do think that the best investment is learning how to use these tools. Call me crazy, but I think education and getting our skills sharpened is probably the best place we could spend our money. But again, I'm a little biased. So anyway, join WeissAdvice.com if that sounds interesting to you. You get access to all my full-length tutorials, plus the live webinars, and the Discord where you can share your work, get feedback, mess around with getting to know people in the community, where sometimes people are hiring each other and stuff like that. So yeah, check that all out. Okay, now, the very end. You know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.